All right. And then minutes are in the chat. And today's question, I will share my screen as well. If you've ever been to a farm, might seem really mundane for a lot of people, but it's also quite possible that you haven't. Um, were there good animals at the farm? Do you remember?
Sheep, cows, hens,
All the
pigs. Oh, it's all
usual
coming back to me now. Ducks and ducks for a while.
usual suspects of things.
I feel like we should go into one of those songs now. Quite, it's
Oh, exactly. Like a childhood farm
yeah,
animal
yeah,
song.
yeah.
I assume you have one in Ireland. Ours is, of course, Old MacDonald. I don't know, is that the
We have Old MacDonald too. We have, yeah,
okay?
that and others.
Okay. Is Old MacDonald? I don't even know. Is that a British song? Is that an Irish song? I have no
Does
idea,
feel
actually.
like an old one, an old nursery rhymey type
If
one.
you
So
have it and we have it, it probably has
yeah,
roots from a long, long time
I'm
ago.
gonna find out now.
Exactly. Yeah, you can tell us about Old MacDonald. All right, so a couple things that I wanted to bring up was the last time we were all here, we had a conversation with the Software Heritage group. And so I just was kind of curious as to what your takeaways were, if you had anything in particular that you thought was interesting, if there's points of connection that you think we should be taking a look at with respect to software heritage. Do you remember that discussion from 2 weeks ago?
So
Yeah, Claire, did you have any thoughts?
yeah, I mean, for me, again, I think it was mentioned on the day that, I think the software heritage are doing an awful lot of stuff that no one that we don't even know about. Like I think that that's been my experience. Every time I've had an interaction with them, I find out about a new project that I didn't know about. And I would also say that speaking with some of their kind of ambassadors and the folks that they run, they have an awful lot of folks connected with them in France, that the French universities in general have had an awful lot of experience in doing open research and open science based on a French national directive to do that. So they've been doing this for some years. And I guess what I will note is that I think that there's probably a lot of materials and resources that they have that are in French that we don't even know that they have, that would probably be very useful for everyone else. So number one, the very specific project that Moran talked about, I think it will be incredibly important to learn about that and understand what that is likely to be, and particularly it's got an ISO standard associated with it, and how it actually works with other similar efforts like Jonathan Starr's effort, because it seems to, incorporate some of the same goals, though maybe coming at it from a different perspective. So that would be one thing that would be really interesting to understand. And then B2, whatever I was counting in, I think it would be really cool to actually learn even more about what Software Heritage has done and their resources that may be of use to this community.
Did you pick up anything like things that they need, say like from a metrics or like health sustainability perspective?
I think that'll be my understanding is the devil is in that detail. So
Okay.
they're very keen, I think, to engage with universities to understand what people are interested in looking at. But of course, their primary goal, and the fact that that could be included in metadata that they pull in. But I believe that their primary goal is just understanding how to make the actual archiving of the software a very easy process. But we did
Mhm.
discuss some of that metadata that they might be gathering in the process. So I guess that would
Okay.
that would probably be coming into that. But that would be part of the feedback, I would say, my understanding of how they want.
Do you go to any of their things? Do they have open meetings?
Yeah, so they have regular kind of community calls and things like that. They have a national, they have a summit the day before it's down in Paris, the day before CHAOSScon
Okay.
in at FOSDEM. So that was what I went to. I hadn't been there before, but that was
I
where I
see.
learned a lot about it.
Okay, okay.
And I believe they have regular update calls as well. But so yeah, so and I believe that they're open, but they're predominantly, to date, my understanding is that they have been working a lot with French universities. So I don't even know if they're in English or in French.
Okay. I was gonna say if they're in English, might have I personally would probably have an interest in attending.
Hmm.
It sounds like we're gonna have to it sounds like they're doing quite a bit of work. Like they're pretty far along. And so one of the challenges I find is Chaos also has done quite a bit of work. So like, do we ask them to participate here or do we try to participate there? It's always a kind of a
Okay.
trick.
And
Uh,
maybe both, right?
yeah, or maybe
Maybe you need both perspectives.
yeah. So I think it might make sense like how you went to their thing like prior to Chaos Con, if as long as their stuff isn't in French for
Not
me.
there. So that event was an international gathering, and I do think that they do have an international community. So it could well be. I'm just like assuming that it might be in French, and it's not at all.
I might start attending those. I just thought it was a really interesting group and interesting work that they're doing. So it's always tricky to try to kind of align two groups, and I think we'll have this talk with Patrick with the Apereo Foundation as well. Like you have two groups that are trying to do things, and there's clearly like some overlap in the Venn diagrams, and it's how we like put fuel to the fire on that overlap and support each other. Um, so anyway, I think there's a little bit more TBD on software heritage, but it seems like there is some good stuff there. Oh, we get a little update on Old McDonald here.
I'm gonna I'm
Hold
gonna
on a second,
shorten
everybody.
that, but it's like
Enough,
for random information that you also learn.
enough about software heritage. Time to get to the real heart of this
Before
meeting.
I forget.
I just wanted to jump in. I love software heritage. So I'm a big fan of what they're doing. And yeah, super supportive of collaborating with them. I like their high level kind of focus on standards and interoperability and metadata. And I think there's a great potential for, like, I don't think they're going to be defining the taxonomies, where the metrics would be, but maybe they'll be supporting or enabling that with the way they build APIs and the way they enable metadata and standards. So maybe
Okay.
CHAOSS could come in and be like, okay, this is what we want the YAML or the JSON or whatever, or the ontology to the values that we'd want to capture, in different
Okay.
projects.
Yep, that makes sense. Um,
And I would just add that there might be um, I don't know if opportunity, but the archive may serve as a resource for researchers as they either you can think of a literature review, and I'm thinking everything from computer science and computer engineering folks working on software specifically research to others who are developing software to support their research. I could see, querying that data to find previous work to inform my work, or the evolution or the iterative steps of research that was done around that. So it becomes an archive for informing future research. I could also see it for reproducibility, where um, somebody is, folks are familiar with the Journal of Open Source Software. I think that's something that they're doing as well. Um, so I think there's a real time in real life application, not just as a museum. Um, I was also looking at their nomenclature, I forget what they call it. They're indexing all of these projects, stamping them with almost like catalog numbers, if you will, so that they're referenceable and things like that. So I think there are applications for the academic and research communities for a tool set in real time as well. And I think Claire said it is. I'm sure there's more in French, despite my French last name, that is probably out there. That, as an ugly American, I don't, speak any other language. So
And to confirm on that, just to say that that is an explicit goal that they talked about at that summit. So that you're absolutely right, Patrick, that they are explicitly saying that that's what they're there to do. So providing an archive from a cultural heritage perspective, providing a service for researchers who want to create a persistent hash identifier for their software, and then providing a place where researchers can go to research. To have data for the researchers. They're three of the goals that they explicitly talked about.
Okay, this is great. And Patrick, you're not alone with a French last name, so German prey it's mine. So, and I speak no French.
Dylan's from the Normans. It's like it's that far back.
Okay. It seems too like from the talk that they're still sorting, like not sorting things out, but figuring things out on their own. And I think any support that we could potentially provide would be appreciated. You know what I mean? Like I don't feel like they're on a path that's their path alone, and they're looking for input. So I think that's nice.
Will I follow up with Moran then and invite her, see if they might have someone who might participate in this community as well? Well, I can do that and just ask her about that, just to see if they'd be
that would be great. Like we need to, if we want to work together, like we can talk all we want over here, but we need to figure out a way to kind of make that connection. And even if it's just somebody like I would imagine if I start attending some of the software heritage meetings, if they have open calls, honestly, I'm mostly just going to listen for months. You know what I mean? I just need to figure out what it is that they're trying to solve and where their pain points are. And if it's to like David's point around standards or ontology development, maybe that's something that we can help with. But I really need to know like whether or not, I don't want to push that if that's not what they want help on. Okay, very cool. Well, let's move on. That was really helpful. All right, so Patrick, here you are. So Apereo Foundation, which I think a lot of you, I think we're all familiar with. I think recently reached out to Georg Link to see if there was, I think, points of connection and overlap, but I'm going to leave that to Patrick to kind of describe what that what that connection was, so as to not get it wrong.
Well, thanks. And to be in all absolute honesty, I had no idea this was on agenda. I didn't look at the agenda before I got on.
No,
I just had a good talk last time, the last couple of times. I'm like, oh, I'm going to start. So
it is kind of funny that I didn't even know you were coming either.
I didn't. I was just now I'm glad I did, because I would have felt like a total jerk if you guys said, why isn't Patrick here to explain this? I guess this is sort of two levels or two activities. The first is, the pretty typical outreach to peer communities to just raise awareness and create opportunities of collaboration and so on. So when I was at the OSI, we started the affiliate membership program, and if you look at the OSI now, it's got dozens of organizations, and that's primary motivation was to have open source projects lend their name to the recognition of and support for and validity of the open source definition. And this is I don't know, this might sound odd now, because I think most people recognize the open source definition as the sort of standard, but there was a time when getting community involvement to support that was important, to show companies and other organizations that no, this is what open source means, and so on, these licenses and so forth. So it's sort of a bit like that. It's not necessarily about any specific artifact or resource like the open source definition, but this just about community building. This is we hadn't had projects like this before. Most of Apereo's members had been organizations, colleges and universities that were using Apereo software in some way, and they were supporting the foundation in order to support. So it's a pretty typical thing. We didn't have a lot of engagement historically with other open source communities. And one of our strategies has been, and you can probably, this is most evident in the way we're working with conferences and so on. So we're reaching out to like organizations like FOSSI and OW2 and All Things Open that are free and open source software activities, and trying to introduce education themed tracks. So we have tracks at those events now that are specific to education. And then we're going to EDUCAUSE and other education specific events and introducing open source as a track. So we're trying to build these connections and create common touch points and grow communities and networks within those things. So that's generally what this is about. A lot of our communities just have interest in open source beyond the application of their whatever service or tool or project that they're building for ed tech. So and there aren't often a lot of resources for folks to connect. So if you're, I don't know, developing a teaching and learning tool in Python, wouldn't it be great if we had some relationship with Python Software Foundation so that there's, you know, an opportunity to collaborate there. So that's sort of the high level basic point. The other thing that we're interested in doing is a much bigger initiative for us, and that is creating a peer community of collaborators that all have specific expertise in one area, and the goal is to create a community that can extend that can create a service portfolio that has capacity and expertise beyond just what Apereo can offer. So the best way to sort of explain it is Apereo is often asked by universities to help mature and help with sustainability of projects. And a good example right now is University of Wisconsin, has a grant that includes Apereo as a contractor. Sometimes it's a sub-grant award, sub-grantee role. And there's a set of services that Apereo has always provided to the projects. And this historically has been something like incubation, where we have sort of a worksheet, and you get a mentor from another project that helps the project, you know, understand IP issues and understands community development management issues and governance issues and engagement with your campus, and, you know, all the things that a project needs to sort of roll through, all the things that really CHAOSS has a sort of metrics around. And we've been referencing those as CHAOSS has matured. But so that's typically the role that Apereo is asked to do. But we know we don't have capacity or expertise in everything that's going on. And there might be other organizations that have that. So our goal is to find peer organizations, either nonprofit foundations that have experience and, you know, reputation of and legacy of success with projects. It could be university departments. You know, there are plenty of good examples of campuses that and departments that are doing good work with the development and maturity and sustainability of open source. It could be the OSPO communities. There's obviously a wealth of information and practice there that could be tapped into. It could even be businesses that are working with open source software authentically. I would always use that word, authentically. And the idea would be, if Apereo gets this grant or some other engagement, we could say, oh, we could complement the services we're providing and not replicate them. And why not, just like sort of like an open source project, reach out to extend the functionality, the feature of that service offering, that service portfolio, by tapping other organizations that are already doing that and doing it better and have experts that are doing it. So I could see, for example, if there was an assessment and some campus project or some other project wanted to do an assessment and use the CHAOSS metrics and go through that, we would say, oh, we have these resources. Now, it might not be CHAOSS, the organizations, and Georg and I talked about this, because I mean, do you have that capacity? But it might be somebody who is already working in it or is an expert and would take on that role as a consultant. And we'd be able to fund that through the grant. So as a sub-grant award winner or a consultant, we would include that service and then be able to provide support for that, because we recognize that people can't work for free. Projects can't. I mean, there's we're all dealing with our own sustainability at the same time. So adding another free service just for the benefit of open source is not sustainable. So so that would be sort of the model. And so that was a lot to just roll off. I don't know if you have questions so far. I can get into more detail, but that's sort of the concept and why we're reaching out.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I have some comments, but what do people think? Thoughts that cross your mind? Yeah, Claire.
Yeah, I have a question actually, and well, a very brief comment, which sounds that it sounds great. So I mean, I think that the more awareness we all have of who's operating in what space and what they're doing and all of that sort of thing can only help. And I fully agree with the ability to make it sustainable and not be a free offering. more suck on people's time. So because there's only a limited amount of that. So yay to all of that. And then the question is around, I suppose, consistency of approach. So I'm aware of, we were looking at doing something very similar when I was part of Inner Source Commons in the same kind of way, very specifically around Inner Source. And I suppose the question that rose in that community was, well, say, you know, might there be an opportunity then to even share, I suppose, materials or tools or resources that those people could then use? And I don't want to overload the goal here, but I'm just kind of thinking about the consistency of approach. So if you've got folks going in doing, say, community management support or something like that, like is there a plan to kind of say, oh, wouldn't it be nice we all do it in the same way, or is it just kind of like, you know, you do it your way, you do it your way, that works well over here and that works well over here?
Right. So we would want to have, yes, consistent. I think a pair would serve as the organization vetting the folks. So what we're calling them when we would present this to the campuses, and I'll just use the campus as an example, is a trusted partner. So this is somebody that we would share our incubation approach with. And our incubation approach doesn't tell you what type of license to select or what type of governance you should have. It just says you should understand licensing upstream, downstream. Do you want to contribute a license agreement? Do you know, all that sort of stuff is in there just to raise awareness on with the new project. And in that case, we would say, okay, what are some organizations that have experience in IP and maybe IP in higher ed, and say, okay, those are folks that we know what they're doing and they're consistent in they're not dictating anything. We'd have criteria, the same that we use with our mentors now, so that, you know, you might have a mentor who's a very free software person, and that's great. But at the same time, or an MIT, you know, permissive license, and that's great. But what we really want to make sure is that the organization picks a license, they understand what that means and what the impact might be on the organization and how that's what we're interested in. So we would do that bit of vetting to ensure that we're not propagating dogma or an agenda or anything, but rather we're simply putting out the you know, steps along the way that a project should go to as they move along. So, you know, there might be that some organizations don't align with that, and so they would not be a trusted advisor, so or trusted partner, and maybe that's snotty or snobby or whatever. But I think we want to ensure that if an organization comes to us and asks for this support, that we can deliver what we've always done, and so that we take that, not burden, but that responsibility, and we can ensure that there's a consistent approach. So yes, we would very much want to do that.
So thanks. This is super helpful, Patrick. So, it's nice to see the second one, like the notes that I have here. So like the outreach is great, and like, kind of the recognition of each other, that top point is helpful, or like the kind of the classic, like logo exchange. It
Exactly.
goes, it's helpful, but it only goes so far. I'm usually much more interested in kind of the bottom part, like how can we actually help each other? Like how can we be better together, kind of thing. And it's also interesting, I didn't know that Apereo did that type of work. So the most of the open source software foundations that I'm familiar with are really there just to broker projects, you know what I mean, and support those projects that are kind of under their umbrella, to think about the things that you talked about, say like licenses, or think about like how to do events, or how to help with visa support. You know what I mean? Like most software or open source software foundations are more along those lines. How to move projects, from incubating to graduated, whatever it might be. So I didn't know that Apereo actually like received requests from, say, universities to think about how they can be better around their open source projects. So that's new to me. So that's really interesting. I do, so it's also interesting because if you look at the minutes here, the practitioner guide is something that's next that I wanted to bring up, which is how do we in the CHAOSS project help universities think about metrics in very specific spots where open source is kind of touching the university. So whether or not that's the use of open source by people, whether or not that's say faculty members or researchers building communities and trying to maintain those communities, whatever it might be. So we're definitely thinking along these lines as well. So I think there's a good point of connection there. The subcontracting would probably be a little trickier, because that's also a point well taken, that like just as a project itself, it's like we're not just free with time to do that type of consulting work. But identifying people in the project who could help, I think that's obviously completely fine. And talking with Georg, obviously they have a consulting company all unto themselves. So that does just that kind of thing. And so these are all really interesting. And I will also say, case in point, so much of this is context specific, that it's tricky just to give people, say, metrics, or any more than you would just give somebody a license. Like you really do need to understand, what the goals of a particular project are. So I found that to be really interesting. So thanks for kind of the overview.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
I'll say just sort of a few things as you were talking came to mind, and Claire as well. So we would ask the organizations like, well, what's your scope of practice that you want to engage in? Like, it doesn't have to, this shouldn't be a burden. It should be, we think we're experts in this area. We have a knowledge base here, and yes, the engagement's going to be different, whether it's all the way from a business to a nonprofit organization to a project. And I'm well aware and can appreciate, as a fiscal sponsor, Apereo, we're in the same. You all being with Linux Foundation is the same as beadwork being with us, right? So beadwork can't enter a contract, and they always sort of roll their eyes of like how they have to check in with mom and dad before they do anything, and that's so I appreciate that. It's going to be different with everyone, but at the same time, if there's someone, beadwork's a calendaring system, if there's someone who wants expertise in international calendaring standards, which I don't know what those are, but they must exist, we could say, Mike Douglas, do you want this contract? Because we know you have, so it might be the same relationship. So we ask CHAOSS to say, okay, what's your body of knowledge that you consider your expertise in, and who are folks that you think would be interested in doing this? So it might be companies, it might be individuals. And again, it's going to be more than just here's the list of the CHAOSS metrics. It's going to be all the stuff you were just talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that might also provide an opportunity for, again, sustainability, not just in the dollars, because the dollars might not be coming to CHAOSS, but it might create a bit of interest for practitioners to join CHAOSS as a, oh, this is now a community of practice that I can, a professional development opportunity, and they'll become invested and they'll want to hopefully contribute back what they learned through these process. Oh, I just was with the University of Wisconsin and we did these analysis of the blah, blah, blah. And this is, it was slightly different because I'm hoping that it sort of creates a bit of organic, cross or further development of the project, because there's a new opportunity for engagement, a new way to engage with the community.
Completely fair. And I think you kind of hit this at a right point in time for the CHAOSS project too. For many years, it's been about asset development. So things like building metrics and building software. And it has shifted over the project has shifted over the years to kind of what you're seeing here. Like, how can these metrics and software now actually make an impact in the world? So there's like this asset building period, and then there's that kind of that outreach or actually have these things make an impact in the world. So I think we're kind of talking the same language here. All right, cool. Any other questions for Patrick? I'll move on to something really quick, and then I do want to get to Claire's. I see you, David, for OSPO for good stuff. So yeah, David.
Just one last question for Patrick then. So given that this does sound very interesting, is there a next step, or is there, like, I'm just wondering what?
So I forwarded, and I'm happy to share. I forwarded on the membership agreement that formalizes this, and Georg was also pointed out they can't sign anything, so he has to, so depending on how that works. So that's really the next step. And I think for us, we're going to, as projects come on, we're first going to treat it as the the logo exchange, and be like, oh, welcome, but at that sort of thing. Then once we have the group in, we've identified the portfolio of services and how organizational, then we'll launch the bigger project around the service portfolio. And I will say we are pursuing funding for this. So the idea would be that we could even compensate the projects for their work in creating the portfolio of services. So I'm not, again, I totally appreciate that we have to have money to do these things. This, we can't continue to. It would be ironic if we were helping to build sustainability by not being sustainable ourselves, or pushing sustainability issues on what folks are working with. Yeah. So those are next steps. The first part, just signing up to be, yay, we're all know each other and we work together, and isn't that awesome? And then the next deeper stuff later.
Cool. David, have a comment?
So I have a vision of universities all aligning and saying, we hate this proprietary tool so much that we're gonna build a replacement that's going to be open source, and sort of having a hit list of the worst tools that maybe somebody maintains, and then just getting a bunch of students and a bunch of maintainers and trying to figure out, how to take some of the ideas that are probably already out there and build replacements, and then figure out the pathway to make it from a hobby project or a prototype into a mature, stable, secure product that could be funded. Is that something that Apereo is looking to support or would enable, or is that too far-fetched?
Well, you have just outlined the history of Apereo. That's exactly why Apereo was formed. And I could go through every project and say that, for example, Sakai Learning Management System, in the days of Blackboard, WebCT, and I don't know, all the other ones from the day, the universities of California, Berkeley, Stanford, Michigan, Indiana, MIT, I'm sure I'm leaving out some others, all got together and said, we're sick of this. So they started a project called Sakai. They got funding from the Mellon Foundation. They created courses, for computer science courses about developing it and so on. This was in 2000, 2004 era. And that's exactly why Apereo was formed, because no campus, they didn't want a single campus managing this. So the IP was all contributed to something at the time called Sakai Foundation. Same thing, all of our projects started like that. So that's typically the model that happens. At some point, a project reaches a tipping point where the campus no longer wants to maintain it, so they reach out to Apereo in some way. I will say that's tapered off just because of the lack of appreciation of open source within higher ed. If you look back at the adoption model starting in 2000, the peak was 2010 when you were at EDUCAUSE and you saw Canvas being announced as an open source tool. You said Open Pearson, the publishing group, had openness was a big thing. The year of the MOOC was going on in 2012. It was all open everything, right? Since that time, it's awareness and appreciation of open source in higher ed from an academic and administrative computing side has sort of tapered off. And that's why the research interest that is going on now, sort of coming back up, is so interesting. But that's why we have the incubation model. That's why we have the mentorship and the onboarding processes, because as these projects sort of formed independently, they went through this analysis to say, okay, do you have a license? Oh, well, the copyright holder is still the University of Michigan. What are you going to do about that? So that sort of thing. So I would love all of that to happen again. So from your idea to the open source God's ears.
Okay, great. I'll work with you. I want to make this happen. And I have like a specific project in mind, but I'm sure there's gazillions.
I wish there were. Yeah, I'd love this. Yeah,
I have this vision of like a board, and it's called like the Your Next board.
I want to put the fear in these proprietary, like we're coming for you, and yeah, I think it could be really fun and scary for them.
We just did, and this might be another area of collaboration in line with this. We just did an initial survey of open source in higher education, and I forget the exact numbers, and I know I'm being recorded, so somebody's going to at some point call this back on me and say you got it wrong. But generally, we polled campus IT leaders, and they said that I'm going to say 75 to 80% agreed that open source was an important part and an increasingly important part of their campus infrastructure and so on. But then I think it was, again, about the same amount, maybe slightly less, 70 to 75% said that they have no strategy or policy in place about the adoption and development of open source software. So while it's becoming more and more important, there's not enough awareness of so things like that, I think, are important to get out in front of campuses that say, look at how much open source you're using, and how are you managing that, and so on. And then I think once that awareness is created, then there'll be more interest in developing something instead of paying $250 million to Workday to get a new ERP system. But never mind.
Stephanie, do you have a comment or a question? Or
yeah, I just wanted to say to David and that Patrick can remind me of the deadlines on this, but there's a couple board seats available on Apereo at the moment, so I'm sure they'd be interested in someone with a great idea. That's part of the board as well, would be very interested in people with great ideas like that. So
I think she was looking at you, David.
I was looking at you, David.
Oh boy, I saw that. I think I'm on my Montessori school board for my daughter. I think my time is full.
That's funny. All right, cool. This is really great. We only have were there any last comments for Patrick? I think honestly, I see really good points of connection here personally as we move forward. So any last comments here for Patrick? All right. I'm just gonna real briefly, I can put this off till the next meeting, but to show you something that based on conversations I've been kind of working on. So Don Foster, who a lot of you know, all of you know, put together templates for what are called practitioner guides, which are really guides to help people think about how metrics can play an important role in a particular context, or to think about a particular thing. So she's been developing guides mostly for corporate open source program offices. That's really where Dawn's experience has lied for years, at her time with Pivotal and VMware, and now here at the CHAOSS project. And so part of the guides are to not just put metrics in front of people and say, these are the metrics you need to think about, full stop, but to say, here are the metrics to think about around a particular topic. And here's how to actually engage with the metrics. So how might you understand, say, trends around new contributors? What might you do to help diagnose trends that you don't like or do like? And how might you gather additional data? So this is these guides are meant to put context around particular metrics. So Patrick, they're actually kind of somewhere in between saying, here are metrics, you figure it out. Here's a full consulting thing, but a guide is kind of meant to be somewhere in between. Like, here's some metrics, here's the ways to think about them that might be useful to you in your context, because everyone is context specific. And if you still maybe don't have enough information out of these guides, then sure, maybe you need to talk to somebody to try to get some more detail. So they're meant to really extend how we think about metrics. So the first one that I just wanted to put out in front of people was a guide around how an academic might think about their own project as having an impact in the world. So how might an academic at, say, GW feel like they can express their own project as having an impact in the world? Like, what are the metrics that they could take a look at, that they could bring forward as part of, say, an RPT case, or something that they could highlight as part of, say, a grant application? See what I'm saying? Like, I need something to hold on to as an academic to try to push forward. So I had gone back to a conversation. A lot of you know Stephen Jacobs at RIT? Yep. So Stephen had put together kind of a model years ago, thinking about these kinds of things. So this is a spin-off on work that Stephen had done. So there were a few more metrics that he had kind of worked out, and I was just trying to reduce it to things that I think are they're observable by people just through trace data. Like, I can actually, a project is pretty easy to take a look at, say, things like new contributors, or are you for release frequency, or take a look at the number of commits that are coming in. So I'm curious, would these types of guides potentially be helpful at your universities to try to standardize the way that you would, in this case, talk to a project owner and say, if you're looking to articulate impact, we recommend that you try to track these 3 metrics over time. And here's how you might understand them. Here's how you might talk to them. And I don't care if these aren't the metrics. I'm more interested in would these guides be helpful? Yeah, Patrick.
So yes, definitely. I mean, Aperia did a community health metrics before, gosh, this is years ago. So before we just sort of started looking at CHAOSS stuff. So definitely yes. And I can share that there was always a bit of questioning about, I mean, of course, there's like the traditional things like downloads and, the
Sure.
comments. So, but even with the traditional things, it's like, well, how are you capturing that? So there's even a best practice on, like, if you're looking at how many downloads, well, how many mirror sites? I don't know. It's all sorts of
Sure.
So having a standard like that, even if it's not right at the beginning, like you said, maybe these aren't the whatever, but just as a starting point that everyone sort of points to and says, all right, this is where we're starting from. It's like the open source, definition. It started off this way, and then, it gets better with people picking at it, or open source software. So I don't know if this specific is it, but this approach, I think, is
Okay. Yeah, these might not be.
beneficial.
And each one of these then naturally has like a published metric behind it, which would even give it a little bit more weight by saying, here's how you actually capture this information. So it might get over that issue that you're talking about as well. All right, so I'm gonna put this off till next time we meet, but I think this is something that I'd really like to push. And I think there's a couple that we could develop. One would be, for example, helping people articulate the impact of the projects that they are running. Another could be, what are the metrics that you take a look at for upstream projects that you're thinking about incorporating into your own work? So what are a couple things that you might want to look at before you go about just including some upstream dependency in your own work? And how might you think about that? So I think there are a couple different kind of directional things that we could build guides for, just to help people kind of orient themselves on the health of their own projects and the health of, say, upstream projects. So cool. All right. Claire, you have a minute. Do you want to talk about this?
Well, I'll just briefly say that there are a lot of people interested in the UN OSPOS for Good Week, or Open Source Week. So I'm involved with the side event on the Friday. And I am looking, there's some news about how that's being formulated and what we're trying to do in each tracks and everything like that. I was actually pinging David to see if he might have, a few minutes after this call to talk about it. If anyone else, because I know I'm looking down the list here, I know there's people who are going to be there. So if anyone else is both free and would like to just talk about that for a little while, I would be interested in getting some feedback about some thoughts around that, because I'm trying to pull together a kind of a track outline. So put up your hand now if you want to be invited immediately thereafter to a little chat. Stephanie, David, I don't know if you're free. Angela, thank you. Great.
I would, but I cannot. So.
And thank you, Patrick. Yeah, I have a Perio down as a suggested participant in some of these as well. We'll absolutely. I'm incorporating these things in, so it's just more. I'm just trying to look to bounce some ideas off people as well at the moment. So if you're not free, definitely will. I think I had Josh and Wes's information.
Well, why don't I, in that case, Claire, I just made you host. So
can I keep this call open? Can I?
Yeah, you can just keep this call open.
Cool.
Why don't you just keep this open? Hang out.
There's not another scheduled one. No, excellent.
No, so I'm going to drop off. You'll be host and just close it off. I'm going to stop the recording too on this.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So you go ahead, Claire.
Okay, thank you. Brilliant.
And, wait, can you stop it? Because I made you host.
You made you. Hold on now.
Sorry, I can't stop it anymore.